Hey there, fellow travelers. Welcome to the Tolkien Road, episode 354. In this episode, we're continuing our journey through the fall of Númenor by exploring the coming of the Nazgûl, the infamous Ringwraiths, and Sauron's service. Before we get started, I'd like to give a double up air 5 to our amazing fellowship. Stick 'em up, fellowship. 3, 2, 1. Whoopsh. Very nice. Special thanks to this episode's executive producers, John R., Kaitlyn of Tea with Tolkien, SaberSystems, Melkor27, and KG. Also, a shout out to those celebrating their fellowship anniversary in November of 2023, Paige H., Matthew F., Michael L., Alaskan Moose 31, Brian H., Chris B., and Daniel S. Thank you all so much for sticking with us over the years. Join the Fellowship of the Road by visiting patreon.com/TolkienRoad. When you join the Fellowship of the Road, it helps us to keep on evering on and lends you some cool perks along the way. Learn more at patreon.com/TolkienRoad. If you're watching, hit that like button, don't forget to subscribe, and let us know what's on your mind in the comments below. Finally, attention binge listeners, subscribe, rate, and review us on iTunes or the platform of your choice. If you are a 5-star fan of the Tolkien Road, you can really help us out by heading over to iTunes or your preferred source for the show and dropping us a rating and review. When you do that, it helps get the word out about the Tolkien Road, which helps us to keep on evering on. All right. In this episode, we'll explore the events attributed to the year 2251 of the Second Age. Those events are Death of Tar-Atanamir, Tar-Ancalimon takes the Sceptre, Rebellion and Division of the Númenóreans begins, and about this time, the Nazgûl or Ringwraiths, slaves of the Nine Rings, first appear. We'll see how the increasing Númenórean anxiety towards death served to create a spiritual environment that led to the seduction and creation of the Nazgûl. The original sources for this portion are primarily Unfinished Tales, Lord of the Rings appendices, Akalabaith, the Waldman Letter, and of the Rings of Power and the Third Age. All right, well, let's talk about Tar-Ancalimon. So, Tar-Ancalimon. Well, Tar-Ancalimon was born in the year Second Age 1986, died in the year Second Age 2386, so exactly 400 years lifespan. He ruled from Second Age 2221 to 2386, 165 years. So Tar-Ancalimon, fourth monarch, and one thing that jumps out to me, not the shortest reign span that there has been, but definitely a much shorter reign span than the last king, than the last monarch. And we're going to see this trend continuing right here. It's going to be kind of slowly going down. And remember, he didn't ascend until the death of his father because Tar-Atanamir was the one who broke that custom of the kings or queens resigning before they reach the end of their life, right? So Tar-Atanamir was kind of the first king since Elros to hang on to his reign for the entirety of his life, and we see in that this like deep desire to want to cling to the things of this life, of this world. So Tar-Ancalimon ascends at age 235. He's the second ruler in a row to rule until death. In fact, all Númenórean rulers hereafter will rule until death. Tar-Atanamir really changed things. And so one quick note, on the death of Tar-Atanamir, it's incorrectly listed as 2221 in the line of Elros from Unfinished Tales, but Endnote 1 here provides a lengthy explanation of why 2251, which is given in the Tale of Years, is the correct year. All right, so during Tar-Ancalimon's reign, I'm having trouble saying that name. During Tar-Ancalimon's reign, Númenor it continues this increasing division, and we read a little bit about what that consisted of. So, on the one hand was the greater party, and they were called the King's Men, and they grew proud and were estranged from the Eldar and the Valar. And on the other hand was the lesser party, and they were called the Elendili, the Elf Friends. For though they remained loyal indeed to the king and the house of Elros, they wished to keep the friendship of the Eldar, and they hearkened to the counsel of the lords of the West. Nonetheless, even they, who named themselves the Faithful, did not wholly escape from the affliction of their people, and they were troubled by the thought of death. So we see this division into the king's men, right? Really kind of the ones who are, the powerful and the loyal to the royal house. And then the elf friends who wanted to maintain the close ties with the Eldar. Even as the envy of the Númenóreans in general increased towards the Valar and towards the Eldar because of their immortality. So we read a little bit more and learn that the bliss of Western decreased despite its increasing might and splendor, right? So, all of the glory and the gold and everything that they're gathering in, it's almost like as that goes up, the despair, right? The bliss went down, the despair increased, right? Okay, the happiness went down. I mean, isn't that so true to life? They had not yet abandoned wisdom and still, at least, feared the Valar. Increasing dread of death, they labored to beat it, but they could only preserve the dead flesh of men. And it became a land filled with silent tombs, or, a land of shadows. I'll just go ahead and mention the pencil sketch that opens this particular chapter. I was wondering what this is. My best guess is that this is supposed to kind of reflect those silent tombs, right? This land filled with silent tombs, kind of this eerie picture. You have a dark figure, kind of shrouded in a black cloak, walking about there. This looks like kind of, that sort of land. I mean, I think that's what's being depicted here. It's not 100% clear to me, but it definitely has kind of a ghostly aura to it, does it not? As you look at it. Now that may just be because it's a pencil sketch, but that's my best guess at it, especially considering the context of opening this particular section of the book. All right. So we read more about this land of shadows. I really thought this was very interesting, what is written here, and this comes from the Peoples of Middle-earth, which is the 12th volume of the History of Middle-earth. And some taught that there was a land of shades filled with the wraiths of the things they had known and loved upon the mortal earth, and that in shadow the dead should come there, bearing with them the shadows of their possessions. So we starting to get like this this alternate sort of explanation of the afterlife from some of these Númenóreans who are maybe jealous. They you can detect in these words that they wanted to, even though they knew they had to depart this world, they wanted to cling to the things of this world somehow. So maybe there's this land of shadows that they go to after they die, and they can kind of they come with them bearing the shadow of their possessions, right? So you live in like your shadow house, and you live you have like your shadow land that you live upon, right? It's interesting that developed even as they have this increasing despair and over the fact that they'll die, this envy over against the Valar and the Eldar, that they want to be able to take the things of this world with them, even if it's just in shadows. They don't want to leave behind what they have gained in this world. All right. Next we learned that they turned away from Eru, right? Men went seldom to the hallow of the Middle-Tarma, it says. They went seldom to the hallow of the Middle-Tarma. The Middle-Tarma, you'll recall, is the great mountain in the center of Númenor, and it was there that 3 times a year. This was the place that was hallowed to Eru Ilúvatar, the Almighty God, and it was there that they offered 3 kind of official prayers. The king would offer 3 official prayers every year, right? At three different times during the year. And I thought it was really interesting that it said the offering of the first fruits was neglected. So that made me think that maybe this was just, is that just referring to the summer feast, right? Because I think that would be when the first fruits would be included, or maybe it was both at the summer feast and at the fall feast. But nevertheless, it makes me think, were they still going there and doing the prayers? They just weren't offering, doing the sacrifice of the first fruits, right? The offering of the first fruits. It's interesting symbolism if that's the case, because it's basically saying like, yes, they'll pay like lip service to the traditions of the past, but they're not actually going to, offer up anything of material note, right? Because that's costly, right? words. We can go ahead and say the words, but to offer up material goods in this place. Well, that's what they wanted to hold on to, right? So they're like, well, why should we be offering these things? Anyway, I might not be reading that right, but that's I think it's possible to read it that way from the text itself. So I'm not sure what you guys would think, but it's interesting to me if that's the case, because again, it just kind of shows this idea that they want to be able to hang on to the things of this world. They don't trust Iluvatar, right, to bless them and to give back, right, in abundance from their offerings, from leaving the things of this world behind. So I just find that very, very interesting symbolism. We also learn that they began to forsake Quenya. They no longer taught it to their children. And though royal titles are still given in Quenya, it's only out of custom. And it makes me think of the Latin versus vernacular liturgical change that Tolkien would have been witness to in his later years. And I'm not sure if the timing of this is quite right, though there is the famous story of Tolkien doing the responses loudly in Latin. Now, I do think in the 60s was when, in the late 50s, early 60s, was when Tolkien wrote a lot of the things that wound up in the story of Númenor. But I know that there was already ongoing debate even before the change to the vernacular kind of happened officially. But I do think that Tolkien was trying to make, was he making commentary? I mean, no, he was writing the story, but again, he's probably reflecting certain things that he sees happening. He sees happening in this world. I find that very interesting, that one of the marks of the Númenóreans' decline is the fact that they reject the language of the elves, that they no longer make it kind of the official language of their world, of their land. All right. Well, we kind of shift gears away from Númenor next, and we go over to what Sauron has going on at this point. We learn that Sauron is dealing out the rings to dwarves and elves, so the 7 to the dwarves and the 9 to men, and it says they was hoping thus to bring under his sway all those that desired secret power beyond the measure of their kind. So the dwarves were not easy to master. The foundations of the 7 hordes was a ring, and Sauron recovered some, and dragons devoured others. So Sauron maybe didn't have as much luck with the dwarves as he was hoping, and then men, but men he did manage to have a little bit more luck. Kind of went along with his plans a little better. There was a shadow. The shadow was growing in the east, spreading over men. We read about that from the Waldman letter. It says, and all those rings that he governed he perverted, the more easily since he had a part in their making, and they were accursed, and they betrayed in the end all those that used them. Men prove easier to ensnare. Those who used the 9 rings became mighty in their day, kings, sorcerers, and warriors of old. They obtained glory and great wealth, yet it turned to their undoing. They had, as it seemed, unending life, yet life became unendurable to them. They could walk, if they would, unseen by all eyes in this world beneath the sun, and they could see things in this world invisible to mortal men. But too often they beheld only the phantoms and delusions of Sauron. And one by one, sooner or later, according to their native strength and to the good or evil of their wills in the beginning, they fell under the thraldom of the ring that they bore, and under the domination of the one which is Sauron's. And they became forever invisible, save to him that wore the ruling ring, and they entered into the realm of shadows. The Nazgûl were they, the Ringwraiths, the enemy's most terrible servants. Darkness went with them, and they cried with the voices of death. So, one of they want to gain all of the things of this world, but perhaps most importantly, they want to gain unending life through these rings, and in a way they do, but not in the way they probably hope to. Again, I'm just amazed by this, and I hate to use the word, but this, like, the symbolism, the allegory of the ring scheme, right? How it's just so applicable to so many things, to the operations of power in this world. The gift is given, you're whatever it is. Maybe you're brought into a job where you all of a sudden have lots of power and lots of wealth and all these things, right? All of your dreams coming true because of this job. But in the end, what does it cost you, right? It's kind of like wait for the other shoe to drop. What does it actually end up costing you? Some people have found themselves in situations, right, where they got way more than they bargained for. Well, I remember, years ago reading the book, the John Grisham book, The Firm. Kind of just popped in my head thinking about this, right, where he joins this young lawyer. He joins, graduates from law school, passes the bar exam, super hardworking, super ambitious, joins this law firm, and next thing he knows, he's like working for the mob, right? And there's like you can never get out of it now, right? And so that book's about that, and that again strikes me as maybe what we see with the Ringwraiths here, and more fantastical, ancient sorts of terms. That you gain so much with the giving of these gifts, but in the end, they ensnare you, right? They ensnare you and actually steal the life from you. And it becomes this sort of living death. It's an ugly thing, nasty thing to think about. Well, we get a description of the Ringwraiths. And if you've read Lord of the Rings, of course, this will be somewhat familiar to you, but I think it's interesting to consider what we have here. One other note, 3 of the 9 Númenóreans were great lords of the Númenórean race. So that's interesting. Three of the 9 Ringwraiths were Númenóreans, were given to Númenóreans. So that's interesting to consider. I'm kind of surprised it's not more, actually, but at least 1/3 of them were actually Númenórean, great lords of Númenórean race. So in the Fellowship of the Ring, Tolkien creates a vivid image of the Nazgûl as centuries later in the Third Age they appeared to Frodo when wearing the One Ring. So black were they that they seemed like black holes in the deep shade behind them. He thought that he heard a faint hiss as of venomous breath and felt a thin, piercing chill. Though everything else remained as before, dim and dark, the shapes became terribly clear. He was able to see beneath their dark wrappings. In their white faces burned keen and merciless eyes. Under their mantles were long gray robes. Upon their gray hairs were helms of silver. In their haggard hands were swords of steel. Their eyes fell on him and pierced him as they rushed towards him. Later in the Two Towers, the author has Faramir speak of the Nazgûl's origins. It is said that their lords were men of Númenor who had fallen into dark wickedness. To them the enemy had given rings of power, and he had devoured them. Living ghosts they were become, terrible and evil. Yeah, so, he was able to see beneath their black wrappings, and their white faces burned keen and merciless eyes, and under their mantles were long gray robes. Upon their gray hairs were helms of silver, and their haggard hands were swords of steel. They had piercing eyes. So, these ghostly figures, and of course this would be 3,000-4,000 years after they had been given these rings by Sauron. So they had been become over a long period of time become like this. So, all right. Well, it seems that Númenor has, in turning its back on the West and neglecting the things of Eru, begun a long slide into nihilism and madness. It strikes me that the Ringwraiths arose in Middle-earth even as this was happening in Númenor. I have to believe that these two things were connected. After all, we can see that the corrupting gifts offered by Sauron through the 9 rings reflect the spiritual concerns of the Númenóreans at this time: wealth, glory, long life. It seems that in turning away from a greater reality beyond this world, we in fact threaten our happiness in it. So next time, we'll look at the establishment of 2 great Númenórean havens in Middle-earth, Umbar and Pelargir. All right, well, wanted to touch base on a quick piece of correspondence from G Mansard 641 on a recent video on YouTube from August of 2023. This correspondent says, "It is so good to see JRRT receive so much acclaim. When I first read Lord of the Rings at 16, now 45 years ago, I was thoroughly captivated. It only intensified after I read The Silmarillion, which remains my favorite. I then reread Lord of the Rings and was astounded at the depth and details I did not notice the first time. Similar experience every time, more and more detail, incredible. A few years later, I went off to university and was appalled at the low regard in which the established academics held him. Kept my enthusiasm to myself, though I happily devoured every new book that Christopher Tolkien published over the ensuing years. I am now a professor myself of history, and I refer to JRRT quite often in reference to the Great War, or when discussing comparative mythology, or Beowulf, or any time I manage to include something about the Kalevala." That's really cool. It's great to hear that from academics, actually in the academic establishment who aren't simply, scholars of Tolkien studies. I think it's probably become more accepted to just be, a fan of Tolkien. Maybe he's grown in regard a little bit. I hope. Maybe he's grown in regard as a as a writer and a linguist and all of this kind of stuff. But maybe because he didn't quite promote the right views, he's maybe gone down a little bit. I don't know. So it may be a dual effect kind of thing that kind of equals out. But we all know, right? I mean, the people who know. There's nobody like him. He was one of a kind, a total genius, and we're just all so blessed that we have the Lord of the Rings and the Silmarillion and the other writings that Christopher gave us on behalf of his father. So that's really cool to hear that you're representing for him, even in history studies. And I hope that there's more academics out there that are able to do that in a university setting and expose people to not simply the movies, which many of them have probably seen, but hopefully to the text and maybe even to the great mind that lies behind all these things. And hopefully, hopefully the work we've done here on the Tolkien Road has inspired some down that road as well, to maybe venture down that road a little more. That would be wonderful to hear. Well, as always, keep the correspondence coming. We'll do our best to respond to you somehow and at some point. Hey, don't forget to stop by TrueMythsPress.com for great merch like super styling and comfy Tolkien Road t-shirts, 2 Trees camper mugs, and signed copies of my books. Once again, that's TrueMythsPress.com. Thanks for supporting our work with your purchase. And thank you to our amazing patrons, especially the following: John R., Kaitlyn of Tea with Tolkien, SaberSystems, Melkor27, KG, Emilio P, Jonathan D, Richard K, Robert H, Paul D, Julia, Werty, JoeBagelMan, Richard, Matt R, John W, Eugene D, Alaskan Moose 31, Chris B, Daniel S, Cory C, Carolyn S, Emiel K, Seb M, Ms. Anonymous, Andrew T, Redhawk, Shannon S, Brian O, Zeke F, James L, Chris L, Asya V, Ish of the Hammer, Teresa C, David of Pints with Jack, and Eric B. All right. Well, thank you all so much for watching and or listening. Appreciate you, our fellowship, and thanks for everybody for watching or listening. We'll talk at you next time. Bye-bye.